There once was a bike path heading towards Busan, but during construction, it was brought to a halt. The signs are still there, pointing the way. And what happens if you follow them? It was the beginning of spring, one of my favorite times of the year, as it usually means new adventures are on the horizon with the nicer weather. I'm a bit of a dreamer sometimes, so I thought that my old hybrid bike that I've toured thousands of kilometers all around Korea on would be ready for a big cycle touring trip outside Korea. But when I showed up to the Trek dealer to get things checked out, they told me my bike is pretty much garbage now, and reassured me that I don't need a bike lock anymore, as nobody will take it from me. Luckily, the older shop nearby was willing to fix my broken spoke just to get it back in working order. I realized it would probably be a bit reckless to load it with heavy camping and film equipment on a bigger trip, and I don't really want to invest in a brand new bike setup at the moment. But there is one section of bike path in Korea I've always been curious about. I arrived at the city of Ulsan late at night. It's about an hour north of Busan, known as being one of the most industrialized cities in Korea, with the world's largest automobile assembly plant and largest shipyard. I woke up to a beautiful sunrise, giving myself the perfect opportunity to do my morning routine with the sun glaring behind me, making me look pretty epic. The reason I chose this exact spot is because when you look at Naver Maps, Korea's equivalent of Google Maps, you can see that this is the exact spot where the Korean East Coast bike path ends. Although technically the official path with stamps ends about 85 kilometers north up here at Haemaji Kongwon in Yeongdeok, which was open to the public in 2015. According to NamuWiki, Korea's Wikipedia, the original plan was to make the bike path go down Korea's entire east coast, from the northernmost point in Gosong all the way down to Busan in the southeast. But due to certain circumstances, such as budget cuts following the end of the Lee Myung-pak administration in 2013, the remainder of the path from Yeongdeok to Busan was scrapped. However, they already built a lot of it, including the section between Yeongdeok and here in Ulsan that I have already ridden, and it's completely fine. There is, however, a reason why the line on the map stops exactly at the spot. See, when I rode to Busan from here in 2021, the bike path suddenly disappeared, and I ended up on a highway for a good 30 kilometers or so. The goal of this trip is to find the sections that I missed, if that's even possible. So with that out of the way, let's get started on our first spring adventure. The weather was perfect, wind at my back, and immediately I found one of the signs for the Donhean-Jajeongeokil, or East Coast Bike Path. There was about 80 kilometers or so until Busan, and the most I'd ridden recently is about 20. Recovering from a moderate cold, I thought I'd just take it easy today, and go until I'm too tired to continue. But as soon as I felt my feet back on the pedals, and saw the astonishing views of the fishing villages on the East Sea, I knew that I wouldn't be able to control myself. The first section of the ride was beautiful, going through little villages right along the coast, but I didn't see any other signs for the bike path, so I was left to navigate just by trying to follow the coast, and then looking at my phone sometimes when I got lost, although there are no obvious markers on there either. I would see more signs here and there to point me in the right direction, but it was getting obvious that it wasn't going to be easy to find where I was going, as although I had a bike lane, there was no blue line on the road like you normally see while following a bike path in Korea. It's not like any of this really mattered to me very much though, as these little scavenger hunts can be fun, and as long as I can see the East Sea to my left, I know I'm headed in the right direction. hadn't seen a sign in a good while. Maybe from being distracted by looking at the scenery. I decided it'd probably be a good idea to use my phone's navigation, as I hadn't a clue where I was. So I stopped at the Daiso to buy a portable battery, but unfortunately they didn't have one. So I continued on south. Without even realizing it, I was now right next to the biggest car manufacturing plant in the world, run by Hyundai, and the sign was telling me to go straight into the right to Daewangam Gongwon. But looking at the map, this is actually the opposite direction I was headed in. So I turned around and started biking by so many factories, large ships, and countless numbers of cars. It was unlike any bike path I'd ever been on before. I was entering a part of Ulsan called Cheongnam-up, and I'm not sure if it's because of the industry, but I've always noticed that Ulsan has some pretty nice roads and infrastructure. It almost seems like another class as far as Korean cities go, with nice bike paths everywhere. I stopped at a completely random place in this super cozy neighborhood that serves hanugukbap, or Korean beef soup and rice, and I'm not exaggerating here. It was absolutely amazing, and one of the best deals I've had anywhere. But back to the bike path story. I ended up lost again, following my navigation, hoping that I'd see some more signs. I was in awe at the development going on in some of these neighborhoods, right beside the older apartment complexes. It's definitely obvious that developments aren't only happening in the greater Seoul area. I ended up on some rough, overgrown, or abandoned sections of sidewalk, passing by gas stations and industry, thinking I must be headed in the wrong direction. And then out of the blue, I guess I was going the right way this whole time. Now that I had some signs to follow, things got a lot easier. It was still a bit industrial, but I ended up going through some farmland as well, which was a nice way to mix things up. The path was taking me way off what the navigation was recommending, so I felt like I might as well just follow the signs, at least when I can see them, as a lot of them are a forgotten thing of the past these days. I continued ahead and hit this one sign which would throw off my entire ride and change the whole course of what I'd go through on this trip without even realizing it. You can't see, but it points south to China Hesuyeokjang, or China Beach, the direction I was headed, and then east to Kongeoptap, the opposite direction. I didn't know this at the time, but over the years the sign had actually spun a full 90 degrees since it was installed back in the day, as the direction to China Beach is actually to the east of here, where it's telling me Kongeoptap is. So I started heading south in the wrong direction. It's easy to look back and think, why didn't I just confirm on my map? But my goal was just to follow the signs blindly whenever I could, and blindly I did, accidentally ending up on the exact same highway I rode on in 2021, with a narrow shoulder, tons of sharp debris that I had to be hyper-focused on, as I knew my tire was getting thin, and I could easily get a puncture on a random screw or piece of glass. Cars were flying past me, I was tense, and looking back on it, I don't know why I didn't just get off at one of the exits and reroute myself to China Beach, but I think a little part of me just believed that I was heading in the right direction. After about an hour and a half, or about 25 kilometers, a sidewalk finally appeared, and I was free again to bike peacefully without focusing so much on the traffic. But I was only about 10 kilometers from Songjong Beach, my final destination in Busan. The rest of the ride was pretty much just city riding like this, so there's not much reason to go into detail. But it is worth noting that there were no signs or markings at all of it being the East Coast bike path. I ended up doing all 80 kilometers of the ride like I originally planned, and I was pretty proud of myself. But I only really successfully mapped out the first half of it, from Gangdong-mongdo Beach to Mangyang Station, and I knew it wouldn't feel right to call it a trip and head home. I was too tired to take the 2-hour subway and bus ride back to my van for the night, but I ended up finding a deal on a motel right next to Songjong Beach for just 25,000 won. So I took the motel and made a little vacation out of it. I did some research in the motel about the bike path, and found the original planned locations of the stamp booths on NamuWiki. So I figured if I just link them all up, there's a good chance that I'll be able to uncover a few more sections of the path, to hopefully map out a peaceful ride from Ulsan to Busan. I returned to my van up north, to bring it back down to Songjong. And on the way back, I decided to drive up to the first potential location of the stamp booth, which was the same direction I took back in 2021. I actually forgot that it had the blue line and signs to guide people in the right direction, but at the top of the hill at Muryeonggoge, there were no signs of a stamp booth, confirming that the path was never actually completed. I made it back to Songjong to do some editing, and since I was in Busan, I figured I might as well have a little fun. It was time to get back to business. My plan was to head north, starting from Songjong, until I reached the sign at Mangyang Station that threw me off a couple days prior. It was about 10 kilometers of basic city riding until the next checkpoint at Kijang Cheukwan, or Kijang Gymnasium, the same 10-kilometer stretch that I finished on last time. The rising sun over the east made for quite a peaceful start of the day, and I headed forth to discover the rest of the path. I arrived at Kijang Cheukwan, the first checkpoint, and there was still no stamp booth or any sign that this was part of the East Coast bike path. So I continued on further, found the entrance to the highway, which I rode on a couple days prior and back in 2021, and started heading towards the EC, in hopes for a more scenic and peaceful ride. I saw signs for Jajango Doro, or simply bike path, and decided I'd see where they go. I could tell immediately that I had found the type of riding I was looking for. A lot quieter in the small town neighborhoods, with cool narrow pathways leading directly to the EC. The fishing villages scream personality, and biking by, you can almost feel every person's individual role in the community. Some people fishing, others running restaurants, and then those running minbaks, so people from outside of town can enjoy the environment as well. There were even small Buddhist temples on the side of the road, which I was quite curious about, but they seemed to be local, and I didn't want to interrupt their peaceful morning. As I continued forth to the next checkpoint at Imnang Hesuyeokjang, I admired the rocky terrain of Korea's east coast. Still technically in Busan, in an area called Kijanggun, known as being mostly a quieter coastal community, which you can easily feel, and there's a lot of cafes there too for the younger generations. This spot here is only a 45-minute bus ride away from Songjong Beach, but the environment is completely different from the rest of Busan that I've seen. Definitely a welcome change from riding on the highway. And although there weren't any signs or stamp booths for the East Coast bike path, just following the generic signs was easy and rewarding, offering great views around every corner. A lot easier than what I faced the first day, at least until the bike path went inland a bit, and things changed. The bike path signs disappeared again, and I ended up biking by one of Korea's newest nuclear power complexes, called Seoul. The road was mostly under construction, and there were signs everywhere saying not to film, so I put away the camera, as even the street view and satellite views from neighbor maps respect this. But looking from far away where I thought it'd be okay to film, it almost feels like another planet, with massive silos on the water, and I think this is why my navigation was telling me to follow the highway before, as there were some sections here where I wasn't even sure if I was allowed to ride through. I felt a little bit nervous, so I tried to go as fast as possible, and suddenly, completely out of the blue, the signs for the East Coast bike path appeared again, for the first time on this day. I was now pretty much smooth sailing, following the beautiful coast up north until the next checkpoint, continuing along the signs to a place called Ganjogod, a cape that seems to have doubled up as a tourist facility, with a decent-sized lighthouse and some kind of theme park set up below, which a lot of families seem to have come up to spend their day at. And then just a few kilometers ahead, I arrived at Jinhae-seokjang, the last checkpoint before heading back up to Mangyang Station, where the misleading sign was the previous day. The beach and scenery were beautiful, the perfect place to take a little break at. And luckily for me, the rest of the ride was a breeze, going back inland while able to follow the signs, not needing to look at my phone, with some beautiful countryside scenery beside me as well. Most people probably don't know this, but cycling is what got me into YouTube back in 2021, as I used to watch cyclist vloggers like Jayoe and Hugill when they were on their journeys around the world. I fell in love with their sense of adventure, so I tried to emulate them while adding my own flavor to it during the pandemic. And there's still always a part of me that wants to go on a big cycling adventure in another country someday, and I came this close to cycling around the island of Kyushu, Japan, which I was supposed to depart for on March 23rd. Postponing because of my bike's poor condition. I have no idea if or when I will continue with that plan, because riding on this day, I realized something big. The old me did things almost to prove that I could do them, such as cycling every bike path in Korea, getting the Grand Slam medal, and a lot of it just for the accomplishment of doing so. Although there were so many amazing times during those adventures, I now realize that I was pushing too hard and being a bit reckless back then. This little trip here on the East Sea was the first time I've made a YouTube video about biking while being present in the moment. Not for the sake of filming an epic video or for an accomplishment, but simply because I've been curious about this section of the East Coast bike path for years, and I've always wanted to find out what I missed out on back then. I finished mapping out the route I set out for, and I'll share it in the description for others if anyone is riding the East Coast and wants a bit of guidance. The main thing I learned from this little trip is it doesn't really matter if you follow your phone's navigation, the signs, or just wander around. If you're doing it because you really want to, for the enjoyment and for the love of the sport, it's a lot easier to just sit back and look at your surroundings, taking it all in. Cycling is now not something I do to prove myself, to show how far I can go, or for praise from others. Instead, it's just a fun way to explore the world around me, getting lost here and there, and enjoying the views where I happen to be at the time. Later on, I'll probably go on a bigger cycling adventure if I'm up to it. But for now, I'll probably stick to smaller rides here, on the bike that started it all with me. As although I shouldn't attach myself to physical objects, there's something special about my hybrid trek bike, and I'd feel guilty doubting it, replacing it with something newer and shinier.